Hello again, podcast listeners, and welcome back to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Today, I'm going to be chatting with my guest about business strategy and the importance of the small business. So, if you are a small business owner or you're thinking about becoming one, and you maybe are struggling with the all-important strategy and how to connect that to the execution, then this is an episode that you're not going to want to miss. And my guest is Kerry Ann Powell of Trafalgar Strategies. So we're going to be having a great chat about strategy, as I've said. Looking forward to it.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Well, Kerry Ann, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join me today at whatever time it is in California, I think you said? No, Florida.
Florida, yeah. It's a pleasure, David, to get a chance to talk.
I'm going to hand over to you to start with to tell us a bit about your background, your career history, and what you do today, and what got you there, and what gets you out of bed in the morning, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a recovering attorney, lobbyist in Washington, D.C. And right now, I'm a business strategist, and I work with small and medium-sized, primarily service-based businesses around strategy. I consult as well as coach with owners of such businesses. And, I think what gets me up in the morning is the idea that, I really strongly believe in the power and the importance of small and medium-sized companies. And so I spend a lot of time helping owners of those types of companies really thrive in business and then in the end thrive in life. So I own a company named Trafalgar Strategies, and me and my team, that's what we do all day long, working with companies to make them better and be able to serve their customers and their employees and their vendors.
Awesome. And how do you go from recovering attorney now, in Washington, and then I think you're a lobbyist and a fundraiser as well, and how do you go from those things to being business strategist? What was that journey like?
Well, so when I started doing work, primarily when I was doing fundraising, so I was a fundraiser before I went to law school. And then when I went to law school, moved to Washington, did some work as an attorney and a lobbyist, and really enjoyed that space. But then I got an opportunity that I couldn't resist, was to head up a fundraising shop of building the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's the first memorial in the National Mall that's not a president or dedicated to our veterans. So when I had the opportunity to move on board there and that project and head up the fundraising aspect of the project, I realized so much of being able to hit a goal like that, which was, we raised over $120 million, my team and I. It's all strategy in the end. There's strategy and then there's execution. In the end, that's it. If you have a good, strong strategic objectives and you're able to create real tasks and operating procedures that get you from that strategy to the execution stage of it, that's really where the magic happens. So when we finished the memorial and I left that post, but the first thing I wanted to do was really help other organizations and leaders be able to really accomplish those types of things. Maybe it's not building an international memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Maybe it's being able to service your clients and customers in your consulting firm, or maybe it is running your restaurant, or maybe it is running your coffee shop, whatever it is. In the end, if we can come up with solid strategies that work and are aligned with the owner of the business, and then implement really good ways in which you are going to execute and execute well, then you can achieve really pretty much everything. So that was really how I transitioned. It was really a matter of I loved what I did. I loved the ability to do it and wanted to help others to be able to do it as well.
Yeah. And as you say, that's where the magic happens, isn't it? It's quite, I mean, I've always been very much the execution person. The strategy was something that, you trust others to do it, which doesn't always work out that well. And it's quite difficult, I think, to be good at both.
Yes. And I think, in the end, when you start thinking about what are some of the things that one can sort of outsource, as a leader and an owner of a business, for instance. The strategy part, you can't really outsource because that's coming from within. And that's your baby. It's your vision of how you'd want the organization to go. Now, what can happen is if you can come up, sometimes, back, a lot of times people think about strategic planning as sort of this thing that's sort of high level and it's like, up there in the clouds. But really the truth, it's simply helping people to bring out of their head their vision onto paper. And that's what me and my team love to do is just sort of pull out of people's heads what their true vision for their organization is, what their true vision for their business is, truly what their true vision for their life is, and get that out on paper. And then we can start mapping the path to executing and then being able to bring those strategic objectives to fruition. So I think, I don't know where this sort of idea came from, where strategy is kind of this really high level, up in the clouds kind of thing. And maybe people felt like it was important to sort of characterize it as such to make themselves feel a little bit like, oh, look at me, I'm a strategist. But the reality is, in the end, we all have a vision. People don't start major projects and businesses, just they don't have a vision in their minds. So the question on the table always is, what's your vision? Is it aligned with who you are and your life? And if that's the case, we're cooking with mustard.
Very true. Yeah, the cynic in me says that strategy became this sort of high-minded thing from authors wanting to sell books about strategy. But, maybe that's unfair. I don't know.
I don't know what it was, but I do think we have to bring it down because we have to bring it down to what it truly is. Because the more we can make it tangible, accessible, the more leaders will hold on to it, and not just hold on to it from a sort of theoretical perspective, but hold on to it where everyone in the organization can look to the strategy and believe in it and be a part of building it, frankly. So it's not just some of the leaders in the top level that are doing the strategy. Everyone in the organization can be about the strategy. And so now everyone believes in it. And then whatever the objectives are coming out of that, everyone's with it. And then you can start executing.
Yeah, and it's making it practical as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so in that journey then, what was your biggest challenge in that process of changing what you do? Well,
I think for me, like anyone, so if someone, if one of your listeners is, for instance, thinking about, okay, I might start a business or I might transition, I think the first thing that I noticed about myself was you kind of almost like you ignore your former life and then you launch off into the deep end and you think, I'm going to have to start everything anew. So I think maybe just recognizing that I had a former life. I have relationships from coming as an attorney, relationships in the lobbyist, as a fundraiser, and frankly, relationships in the ways that I, in my civic duty, I've served on a number of boards. And so being able to pull all of that back into my life, and recognize that this was not me breaking and then starting afresh. It was a transition. It was a new place of me expressing my own creativity in the world. So I think a lot of times people feel like their identity is that their career is their identity. And so it's like, this is what I do. And if I'm doing something else differently, then I'm like not that person anymore. I'm another person. But the reality is, we are all one whole human being doing various things and expressing creativity in different ways and bringing our gifts to the world differently. And all of the relationships and learnings, even many of the learnings that I acquired as an attorney play into the learnings that I'm using as a business strategist and working with my clients. So it's about really bringing everything in your life forward. And I think that was probably where I didn't do initially. And then when I finally realized, wait a minute, bringing all of this forward, it made me a stronger leader to my team. It made me a stronger business owner, and it made me a stronger strategist and consultant for my clients.
And the temptation, particularly if you're leaving the past role for, let's call them negative reasons, the temptation is to turn the page, isn't it? Close the chapter and put it in the past and start afresh. But you're right, you've got to take those lessons forward. Otherwise, you're missing a huge opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agree.
And, too, David, even if we, say it's negative reasons, I don't really think that anything really ever happens to us, per se. It may feel negative, but in the end, if it lands you in the direction in where you need to go or be in your life, then it's not really negative. It just is. And we can use that to catapult us into the other areas that we're supposed to be. We don't like discomfort as humans. We don't like to feel, lordy, so we kind of want to stay where we are and keep it safe there. But sometimes these things happen, and, they felt negative at the time. And so we're not going to, belittle that reality, but also recognizing that had it not happened, you wouldn't be here. And oftentimes here is better than there. So I do think reframing it helps us then realize, oh, wait, over there is not bad. We may have left in a way that I didn't want to leave, but if I can sort of eliminate the negative aspects of it, then you can look back and say, oh my God, I learned this. I developed this great relationship with this person, and I'm going to try to, reach out and try to warm it back up since I kind of didn't talk to them for a while. Whatever it was, I think in the end, we're all human. And also too, like this idea of like negativity, we always feel as if we're the only ones who have had this experience. But in the history of all of humanity, there had to have been someone else who had experienced something, whatever it is the experience was, that made you leave negatively or in a way that you could perceive to be negative. So it's not like you're the only one in the world who's experienced that. And the more we realize we're not the only ones, we're not alone, then shame begins to dissipate, because shame is really the thing that keeps us from being able to look back and say, hey, I'm bringing all my learnings, my relationships, my skill sets forward. It's this feeling like, oh, even though I did a good job over there, it ended so badly, so I feel shameful about it. So I'm just going to like turn the page and keep it moving. But that doesn't serve us very well. So if we can decrease shame, because shame is never our friend, ever. We can decrease shame by allowing ourselves to recognize that we're not the only ones who've ever experienced the bad ending to something. Then we can then look back and pull things forward and then move on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very powerful ability as well to be able to take something that was such a horrible or negative or just less good experience at the time and be able to see the positive in it. And I think, time and distance certainly helps with that.
Yeah, it does. It really does. It does. Yeah. And you know what else too? Like, I noticed I got an email from someone who our relationship ended poorly. It was a professional relationship, and it wasn't really like so bad, but in my mind I built it up to be this really horrible thing. So I got an email from that person, and it took me a week and a half to open it, because I was like, it's gonna be awful, it's gonna be spewy, I don't want to read it. And I finally opened it up, and it was just such a benign email, and I think it might have been an email that was like a mass email they might have sent to other professionals. I think they were sort of like saying that they were leaving a new job, and sort of like mass email. It had nothing to do with me, like really nothing to do with me. But yet I spent a week and a half kind of like, I don't want to read it. It's going to be so bad, and I don't, And honest to goodness, we build things up so much in our heads, and they keep us from really moving forward. And in the end, it really isn't that bad, or we've imagined what it could be, but it really isn't.
The brain fills the vacuum, doesn't it? Yeah.
It sure does. It sure does.
It's the the difficult part of human nature, isn't it? Sadly, but let's turn back to the positive then. Which part of your business are you most proud of today?
I'm in the process of building a team, and that's been exciting. Early days in the business, I would primarily outsource a lot of the work to contractors. And obviously they did fantastic work, but they weren't full time on the team. And so there was a different kind of relationship. They're a little not as vested. And now, I have a good number of people that are on the team, and I'm continuing to add as the days and months go by. And it's a totally different feeling. It's something that I'm really proud of. One, because, it's great to build something with others. Two, it allows me to really see people bring their skills to bear in an environment that they seem to really love and enjoy and respect their colleagues and myself. But also, I think, one of the things that I love about, small businesses and mid-sized businesses if we're looking in the U.S., the statistics are 99% of businesses are small and mid-sized, and 2/3 of people are employed by SMBs, which means that basically the impact that it has on the economy, that businesses that are in that category that have on the economy is significant. I know in Europe, in the EU, it's 99% of businesses are small and medium-sized businesses. I don't know what percentage of employees work for those companies, but I do know, like in Africa, 80% of employees work for a small mid-sized business. So when you start looking at, 3 large continents, North America, Europe, and Africa, and those statistics are showing that most people are working for a small and medium-sized company, and the number of companies that are in the economy are small and mid-sized, then you begin to realize the impact that you're making in the lives of the individuals that you're employing. Because it's not just employing one person, it's employing a person, and then it's providing, food, shelter, clothing for their families. It's providing taxes for their communities so they can have schools and roads and infrastructure. And it's then providing much more financial support for the other things that make a community, a city, a nation, and the world work. So while I'm my own little part of the world doing my thing, building a team, it's also recognizing that there's other owners of small and medium-sized businesses that are doing the same thing and really building up what could be, really strong infrastructure for our economies, our global economies.
Yeah, the figures are pretty much the same in the UK as well. I think it's 99.8 or something. And when you look at some of the other statistics on small business, at least in the UK, I don't know what it's like in the States, but I think it's something like 30% of new SMEs won't survive the first year, and less than half will survive more than 5 years.
Yeah.
And when you add that up with the amount of or percentage of the workforce that works for those companies, it's kind of scary, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And that's why it always surprises me. Of course, there's many reasons, David, why they fail. And, I do a lot of work with my clients to make sure that they don't. But there's also, there's the internal stuff that business owners must do to make sure that they are implementing strong companies. Because, the number one reason why companies fail is cash. In the end, it's cash flow. And so being able to be very clear about what's going on cash wise. I mean, you may be making a profit, but if you don't have cash, that's just it, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is, an owner is wearing too many hats so that they are burnt out. That's one of the top 4 reasons. Not being able to build a strong team. That's another top reason. And then the other one is basically, not being able to scale. Because, if you don't grow, if you're not growing, you're dying. Anything in nature is as such. So the business, and I'm not saying it's like this gangbuster scaling, but in terms of growing in a way that makes sense to the company, to the owner, one must be growing, one must be scaling. So those are the 4 top reasons why businesses fail. So when you start looking at, okay, what can people do, owners do within a company, paying attention to the chaos that's in there, right? If there's like inconsistent cash flow, if it's perpetually negative, if, you don't really know what's happening cash wise, then that's like, 82% of businesses fail because of that. So that's a big, big signal that one must pay attention to it and control it as best they can. I mean, yeah, business is up and down, but, not chaotic, right? If it's chaotic, it's going to fail. I mean, it's just a fact. But so we have these sort of internal things that business owners must do. But I'm always very fascinated by the fact that, when you start looking at, there's some talk that we could be going into a recessionary year. There's different perspectives on what that looks like. However, it's never fails me at how much I know in the U.S. we are perpetually bailing out very large the multinational corporations each time we're in these types of recessionary economic such situations. But if you're looking at the stats in the U.S., if 2/3 of people work for an SMB, then it seems to me like if we're going to invest, taxpayer dollars to sort of buttress any part of the economy, it would be the SMBs, right? And it's not, you don't have to go either or, but I find it fascinating that we don't really invest the kind of investments, loans, and bailouts that larger companies get compared to when they're looking at small and medium-sized companies. So I do think there's something to be said around how we are looking at the importance of SMBs.
I agree, partly because I'm an SME myself, so I'm biased, obviously. But yeah, I mean, two thoughts on that, I guess. One is you wonder how much of a coincidence it is that these big multinationals are constantly getting record profits every year when, yes, because they keep getting shored up by governments across the world. And then secondly, if you were going to, from a government's point of view, if you were going to do more to help SMEs, I mean, the sheer number of them involved and the logistics and the bureaucracy that have to get involved to offer that same type of support to that many different companies, I can totally see why they just choose the big targets, because then it's one or two or three of them.
It's easier to get right.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can sell it to the taxpayers, and it's much easier, isn't it? Yeah, not saying it's right or wrong, but I understand why.
But it is, it totally is. Yeah, it totally is. Yeah. But in the end, I think we have to always be thinking about, and again, this is the struggle of democratic government, right? We as citizens have the responsibility to sort of be paying attention to these things. And of course, if they're not aware, because I don't think most people realize the importance of, SMBs in the global economy as a whole, not to mention their own local communities. So I think too, a part of it is sort of, understanding and getting educated around it, and then being able to recognize the importance of communicating that to their representatives, because in the end, the government's ours. But I do think, it's a more really kind of a thing, it's kind of like, oh my God, how are we going to manage that? But we can manage, people, many different sort of minute aspects of the way that we operate in our country. So it seems to me like this should be a way to be able to manage it. But I do think politically it's not that sexy. So, it's like, look, we've saved a major car company that employs all these people. So it feels better. But I think from the end, though, there are some things that in terms of being a leader of a small business is important to recognize. There are some things that, look, 82%, this is not like fake numbers. It consistently shows up. 82% of small businesses fail because of cash. And yes, a part of that is trying to be able to get investments into the business. But there are a lot of grants out there for small businesses. Many don't actually apply for them. Two, a part of this is just sort of being able to forecast, even just simply having a spreadsheet or have a cash flow forecast so you can look and see well, this month's going to be a dip, so let me try to get more sales in to make sure it's not a dip. There are a lot of things that one can do within their own business to be able to manage cash in a way that makes sense and also grow. And, obviously there's a dance around it, but, even if you're not looking for, what the government's going to be doing, there are things that we can do internally as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, just being aware of the problem is the first step, isn't it? Which, even a lot of business owners don't do that. So yeah, good advice. No question. Yeah. So I was going to ask, what is a small business champion? But I think the listeners, from listening to your last couple of answers, have already worked that out. And you're very
clearly, how I feel about this.
Yeah, that's very clearly what you are. So no arguments there. Yeah, I mean, we've talked a bit about why SMEs are so important at a national level, but what about for the world economy at a global level? Why are they so pivotal?
Well, when you start thinking about innovation, for instance, innovation comes from small business in the end. I mean, you see these sorts of, there's this great book called, I don't remember the name of the author, it's like from innovation theater to innovation, I think is in the title. And it's the idea of, it's written primarily to sort of critique what large companies are doing around, innovation. So they'll do like, innovation-a-thons or different things that make it look like they're being innovative. But the reality is that, what is that for, invention is the mother, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention, or something to that effect, is that quote. But the reality is that majority of innovation comes from small business. So when you start thinking about how we as a global economy work, like, right now, some of the things that we take for granted were once innovative, and they are because some small business decided to do it. So I think innovation is one part of it. The other part of it, again, globally, is the number of people they're employing. If you start thinking about how does a country get out of a situation or increase, sort of the GDP, a part of it is really creating or supporting or providing infrastructure that small businesses can begin to grow, because then you increase your GDP because there's more products, more services, and so forth. So it's not just about, local, there's sort of like the family impact. When a business owner is thriving, then therefore their family is thriving. Their employees' families are thriving. The vendors' families are thriving. So there is that. Their local community is thriving and their country is thriving. And therefore, once, if we can get all countries thriving, then it's a global effect. So we're not all like in little boats by themselves, sort of disconnected. We're all on one big blue ball. So, and as we are more globalized as a world, everything that happens in one nation happens to another, and it impacts it. So I do think that globally, and then the numbers are bigger in other parts of the world. I mean, when you start looking at, I'm going to be speaking in Thailand, in Bangkok in a couple of months, and the conversation is around women's leadership. And, we'll be talking about, the importance of women business owners to scaling. And, when you start looking at sort of the impact of how women's businesses are growing, I mean, those numbers are ridiculously high. The amount, like, that's the largest segment of businesses that are really expanding, the number of women entrepreneurs that are building businesses. Not to mention, there are a number of countries in Africa right now where there are more women entrepreneurs than there are men, which is shocking, because typically in the world, that's not typically how it shows up. So this really is a global phenomenon, and it's affecting the way the global economy operates. And again, it doesn't, like, there is no bad thing. I mean, there's, only good comes from being able to make a business thrive within all of our global economies. So yeah, I completely think that it's more than just our own neck of the wood kind of a conversation, although you have to start locally and small and then be able to impact. But the more of this that's impacted, the global it is, the more global it is.
Yeah, that very comprehensive answer. I have nothing else really to add to that. I can only applaud though the increase in women-led businesses. I think I've never worked with or for a bad woman leader, but I've encountered so many bad male leaders. That's a very small sample size, to be fair, and I'm sure I'm biased from those experiences. But at the same time, if we think about all the negative traits that we see in leaders, they do tend to be fairly male-oriented traits, don't they? Like,
they kind of
the
are.
ego, the arrogance, all that kind of thing.
The interesting thing, David, is I don't know if it was McKinsey that did this study, but they found that the more companies, and this was a scan of not just small businesses, but it was large companies on down, found that companies that had more women in leadership, the more profitable they were. And there was like all these different markers of growth that were better than if they did not. And those statistics were really shocking, I think, for a lot. I mean, they're not shocking to me and all my female colleagues, but it was great to sort of have those kinds of stats on the table. The unfortunate thing is it is completely unfortunate that when you start looking at women-led businesses, women-owned businesses, startups, when they're going to try to get investment, first of all, the questions that are being asked are way different than the questions that are being asked of men who are coming in as owners of startups. And the kinds of, and the numbers are startlingly low. I don't have the statistics for you right now, but it's startlingly low compared to how women are able to get investments and funding versus men when they bringing requests for funding for their startups. So I think that even though the studies show that business leadership for women is actually the more women you have in leadership, the more profitable you are. Yet, when it comes to whether or not investors are going to invest in women-led firms, it's just the difference is so very different. Even to the point where the questions that are asked, there's always questions about risk, like can you handle risk? These sort of questions that are like, well, okay, we've got a business here, so I guess we can handle risk, So I do think there is something to be said for people who have the resources to be able to invest in good companies that happen to be led by women are missing out on the opportunity to not only get serious returns, but also it shows it's a real bias that's unfortunately, robbing our countries and our world from whatever it is that these businesses are trying to offer the world.
I kind of feel like if that risk question was asked of more male founders, that maybe there'd be less failed businesses out there. But,
David, you said it, I didn't.
Yeah. As someone who's been through a few companies as an employee where I was thrown the David, go and do the risk register task because nobody else could be bothered to do it. It sort of feels to me like maybe risk isn't always high on the agenda for male founders. Anyway, yeah.
I actually was not to dig up old dirt, but I kind of binged this weekend on, I don't know if Netflix in the UK has it, but they just launched the a Bernie Madoff 4 series. Did you see it?
I'm 2 episodes in. What a weird coincidence.
Oh my God. I totally binged it 4 hours. Gosh. But yesterday, like Sunday, so it's my day off. But but yes, the more and more I watch this thing, the more I realize this man was able to get away with it. Yes, okay, bad person, should not have done that, really awful human being. But it really was a matter of the fact that the people like the SEC and the people who would have been able to stop or at least investigate more as to what was going on, they just assumed that he was perfect. It was perfectly legitimate. I couldn't get over it.
Yeah. I mean, I've not finished it yet, but I think the thing that puzzles me the most about it is why he did it. Because he had a profitable market leading business that was legitimate. Why did he feel the need to have this second side business? I mean, what was the point of it? I just don't get it.
I know. It was so confusing. And what was also startling was that he did it from very early in the game. I mean, it was, I don't know. In my mind, I always thought that it was one of those things that sort of popped up after, but it started from early days. So it was just bizarre.
Yeah.
Why?
Very weird. Very weird. Trying to understand the criminal mind is beyond me, I'm afraid.
Yes. Don't get it at all.
Yeah. Well, the main thing is he got caught eventually, didn't he? So there we go.
Yeah. But all those people who suffered from his stuff, I think are still dealing with the ramifications of such. And then, of course, he ruined his family, which,
True. Yeah. Well, as I say, I've not finished it yet. So
yeah.
It is.
But I do think, to your point around, I wonder if, a large part of the reasons why he was able to get around it, to get over on so many people, was because, he was this, man about town, this, no one is going to question him, that kind of thing. And I often wonder if, if it was a woman, would they have been as trusting and saying, yeah, well, no, it's fine. It's there's no fraud, because there's a lot of sort of red flags. And I do think that it's really important that as we think about what's best for our economies, our local economies, our national economies, and as we see different people being able to get into starting businesses and being able to build legacy businesses. Obviously, if you want to have a side hustle, that's a different conversation. Or if you want to sort of have a lifestyle business, which again, I'm all about it. But I think what I'm talking about is people who are trying to start companies where they can leave something behind. It requires investment. It requires support. It requires infrastructure. It requires these kinds of things to be able to support it. And this, in the end, supports and benefits our economies as a whole. So, there we go.
Well, it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I are like, so the two of us.
What then, if you had to pick one, or maybe two, what would be the biggest leadership and management lesson that you've taken from your career so far?
Your team is really kind of the most important part of your business. And for me, at least, that's how I look at it. And when I was early days, I personally have maybe I've evolved from this as well, but the way that I work, I work until it's done, kind of a thing, so I work hard, I drive hard, I go hard. And then once it's done, I kind of chill. And so that would mean some really unhealthy behaviors early days. I wouldn't take lunch as much, or I wouldn't, I would work late, and, and being in Washington, I think too, sort of growing professionally in Washington, that was also very a culture thing as well, where FaceTime was important. So being able to be at the office till late, and, so that your bosses see you, was also sort of a weird toxic cultural trait. But I just always was the type of person that was going to sort of do it till it's done, kind of thing. So as I began to grow professionally, and particularly when I was building the memorial, I began to subconsciously expect my team to do the same. And, it's difficult when you're a leader. You don't realize how much your team is looking at you, and then sort of to sort of set the tone for how they should behave. And so I remembered, them, staying late as well, even though when I was staying late, or not taking lunch when I was taking lunch, and me feeling even a little annoyed if things didn't get done faster or sooner. And I remember I was running a meeting, and the president of the organization, who I'd reported directly to, we were sitting in a meeting. It was like, and it was bumping up against lunchtime. And in my mind, I'm like, well, we just got to keep going, And he turned to me, and it was like about, say, 10 minutes before it was time to end for lunch. And I guess in his mind, he figured we'll just come back after lunch. And he turned to me and he says, so Carrie Ann, so we're all going to go to lunch and eat. You can stay here if you would like, but we're all going to go to lunch and eat. And that was his way of saying, you're not leading well. You are, you're not leading in a healthy way, an emotionally healthy way, and it's impacting the team. And you can do this if you'd like on a personal level, though I don't recommend it, because me, the head of the organization, I'm going to lunch too. And it really helped me realize that, he didn't have to sit me down and have a long conversation around it. He just did that one behavior, and it made me realize that it was a toxic trait, and it was poor leadership. And then, so the more I started like going and, saying, hey guys, let's have lunch, or let's do this or whatever, or let's, go home. We'll pick it up tomorrow. I realized that folks were happier and they were more productive and more excited. And, then, towards the end of the project, they would tease me a little bit about, hey, Carrie Ann, you're like crazy. Like, you do this. And so I began to realize in the end that, your team, I've always known that my team was the most important part of how we were able to move a needle. At the same time, recognizing that how they feel within doing that is so vitally important. And so I always say, the team first, and everything else comes along once you prioritize your team. It's a lesson that I've learned, and I've implemented it now for several years, and it continues to be the most important leadership lesson that I have taken on board. And even now, as I continue to build my company, it's the thing that I put there. And when you get email messages from your teams, just thanking you and really feeling so safe and comfortable working and coming up with cool ideas, and it makes you realize that is the better way to go. So I know a lot of folks come into starting a business, and they're coming out of corporate, coming out of more toxic environments, and they don't really know how to lead a team very well. And because they themselves weren't led very well, I think it's really important to stop and pause and think about what kind of culture do you want to build in your company? Maybe the company that they built were coming from didn't have a very good culture. But I really believe if you can value your team in a way that is human and just really it's human, then you begin to see how people flourish and grow, and you're kind of creating a bit of like a little microcosm of society within your company.
It's interesting what you say about people coming from corporate environments, and I've had similar experience with coming from other SMEs. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things, isn't it, where if you're never taught how to do something, you just emulate the last person you saw do it.
Yeah.
And in the case of leadership, if you've had some really toxic leadership, but you've never known it any other way, with anything, not just leadership, if you've never known something any other way, you just think that's the way it's done. So that's what you do. But you're absolutely right. More business owners could benefit from that self-reflection and focusing on what culture they want to build.
Yeah. Because, I think, David, we don't realize when you're starting, particularly if you're in the early days of an SMB, it really does feel like it's just you against the world, right? And you just want to build it. You just want to scale it. You just want to get more revenue. And you're just sort of like there, and that's your focus. And anybody that you bring on the team, you sort of feel like is just there for the purpose of that one goal. But if we can pause a bit and look in the future as to how we want our companies to be in the next 15 years, right? I have, you've heard the term BHAG. I have my BHAG, and it's my BHAG that I'm constantly saying to myself. So when I'm building towards the BHAG. And so the company I want it to be. So then that makes every decision I make now, even as a smaller company, to realize it has an impact on how it's going to be as a larger company. And again, not to say that everyone has to want to build a multinational company. That's not, but whatever stage of the company you want it to be, whatever size or iteration of it in the next 15 years, everything you do today builds upon that. So then if you're being crazy and chaotic in your business today, then it's not like you're going to somehow change that once it's better. You're going to be crazy and chaotic in the company as it is larger and more established. And then you have real problems because it's easy to change a ship when it's small. But once it starts getting larger and more entrenched, it's like moving the Titanic. You can't do it.
Much easier to change it when it's just you, isn't it? And then vice versa as well. Like it's a lot easier to stop the negatives from happening at the beginning, but also it's a lot easier to set in the positives early, rather than trying to do that in hindsight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We could talk about the biggest leadership mistake you've seen, but I think you might have answered that already, really. But
the biggest leadership mistake?
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that was where I was, drilling my team to be like, not eating lunch or something.
It doesn't have to be your mistake. It could have been something you saw somebody else do, I guess. But
yeah, I think, I would say there's one that I did. I didn't realize I was doing it. And this is very specific to sort of running a business, because I remember I was so excited about, growing and getting new clients and, revenue and the blah, blah, blah. And so I brought on a client that I knew was going to be a lot more work than at the time. I probably brought on one person. This was when I was primarily doing consulting with NGOs. And I'd had one person on full time, but I had a lot of sort of folks that were contracting with me. And I thought that I had done a good enough job to sort of have enough folks to be able to execute the contract. Anyway, I got the contract, made a lot of promises, and couldn't execute. It was a 1-year agreement, didn't have enough people to execute, and it wasn't just about people, it was people that had the skill set that I needed. And in the end, it just did not perform at all. It was just completely a failure. And, that last closeout meeting with the client was just, I would have rather have eaten dirt than have to sit there with the president and sort of run through the fact that we didn't perform the way that we wanted to perform or get to the results we needed to get to. And, it really, it threw me for a loop for a bit, to be honest, my confidence and my ability to say, can I even do this? Like, really? Can I do this? And I started playing a bit smaller after that. I started trying to get smaller contracts and I could really do this. And then I started shrinking a bit. And it really wasn't until I sort of spent the time when I realized that the feeling of shame was popping up so much from that mistake or from that colossal, failure. I began to realize that I was letting it control me. So there's 2 lessons that I learned from that. One was, you scale, you grow, but you scale and grow in the way that makes sense for your company. So, just because you have a large contract that that you think is going to be great doesn't mean that you can really do it. But at the same time, being smart about how, like, for instance, had I sort of processed through what I think really could have been needed and then found some other ways to hire, that might have been a better way to do it. So being clear about how you plan to grow is one thing. That was a lesson I learned, and it's a lesson I implement and I talk to my clients about quite a bit. On the other side, though, is the idea of mistakes, right? So I made a huge mistake. It had significant impact on the organization, the client. But at the same time, I was spending way too much time letting that mistake control me to the point where I was beginning to shrink. And so I had to begin to confront it and look at it and say, okay, what are the lessons that I learned from it? Bam, 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 and bam. Can I do anything to change it now? Nope. It's pretty much done. Does that mean I'm a bad person? No, I made a mistake. And then from that point, how can I then move forward? It doesn't mean that I don't, sometimes think on it and be like, oh God, that moment where you're like, but I don't let it control me any longer. So being able to recognize that if I am breathing oxygen, I'm going to be making mistakes. And if I plan to build a company that lasts, I'm going to be making a lot of mistakes. How do I then plan to react every time I make some sort of colossal mistake? Do I plan to spend my time shrinking? Then let's close down shop right now and call it a day and go get a job. But either that, or how can I learn from it? How can I forgive myself? How can I release the shame? And then how can I move on? Those were things that I had to do because I was going to either shrink myself out of running a business or just continue to stay in a place where I'm constantly beating myself up. So those two things balancing helped me too. So that was huge. I should never have taken on that contract. But at the same time, I did. Now, how do I manage it? How do I manage the way that I felt afterwards? Mistake, but yet again, nothing really happens to us. It happens for us. It made me realize and learn something that you read in the books all the time about, scaling well. I have some experience around it. So, yeah.
I think, you can't be a business owner if you're afraid of making mistakes. I think I'd go further actually and say you need to be seeking out mistakes within reason. Like, I don't mean go out and deliberately stuff everything up. But you want to get to those points of mistakes because, as you say, that's where the learning is, isn't it? It's if you get things right every time without really thinking about it or trying, you're not learning anything. And I think yes, it mirrors a few mistakes I made myself, I must say, in the early days of the business and in the not so early days, in the COVID years. Let's put it that way.
Like what, David?
You feel, particularly if you're a solopreneur, I kind of hate that word, but it's quite descriptive.
Yeah.
You don't feel able always to turn down work. So even if you're maybe not capable of doing it, or if it's not quite the right fit for what you want to be doing, you don't feel like you can say no, especially with the pandemic context back then as well. And I think, I drew a massive lesson from that, and I'm much more picky now about what work I'll take on. And it's more important to me that it's something I feel not necessarily confident of doing, but it's something I know I can put my mind to it and get on with it. And also it fits with the kind of business I'm looking for, the kind of business I am. And that I'm not going to, get myself stuck in a 10-year contract doing something I hate.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's like, to that point, do you notice that it's also like being able to select your clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's really the main motivator for me, if I'm honest. It is a lifestyle business for me. It's not about scaling and becoming a billionaire or anything like that. It's exactly that. It's about the clients and the projects that are interesting, that I care about, that I want to work with. And that's, that's such a huge lesson for me, because when I started the business, it would have been, I need to make money, I need to pay the mortgage. That was it.
That was it.
But actually, that mindset led me into almost not being able to do that. So that was my lesson.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. No, that's so true. It's like, it's so true how we think the idea is a good idea or a good motivator, but in the end, it's not. It really is. And I think a lot of my clients have a hard time when I start talking about being picky with clients. And who they're going to work with. Oh my gosh, the pushback is real. It's like, no, Karen, if I do that, then you know, I'm gonna like not be able to meet payroll this month. And I'm like, I promise you, the more you get better clients, the more aligned clients, then you'll have more revenue in the business because then you're really clear.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
If you had to pick one person, they could be alive or dead, past, present, real or fictitious, but this person who would, in your opinion, perfectly embody leadership, who would that be and why?
I'm always very fascinated by the way Dr. Martin Luther King and the folks that were leading the civil rights movement at that time were able to. There was no social media, there was like nothing. There's like word of mouth and then there's mail, right? And I guess, there were phone calls, right? So there's the telephone. But to be able to mobilize people in a way that was inspiring, yes, because I think inspiration is really important as a leader, but inspiring people not for the purpose of inspiration, but inspiration to act. I mean, it is to get people to do that requires a great ability and capacity to lead. And I think that is really so impressive. And it's something that I've always admired, even as I think about what Dr. King and his cohorts did. So I would say that would be something that I admire. But I also got a chance to meet Colin Powell. I don't know if you, but he was on the executive leadership cabinet when we were building the memorial. And so I got a chance to meet him a couple times. And it was kind of fun because we had the same last name. So I'm always like, hey, uncle. But anyway, no one says that to Colin Powell. But but watching him as a leader was something that inspired me so much. One thing that really struck me was when, this is a man who has his hands in so many pots during that time period. And so many people were calling upon him. And whenever he was ever interviewed for a news, because he's a busy man, so he wasn't going to come to like all the meetings, and so forth. But it always struck me that whenever I saw him interviewed on television, he always found a way to talk about the project as if he had been in the last meeting and I had briefed him right then and there. I mean, he knew the numbers, he knew what was going on. And it just goes to show me that leadership doesn't have to be in the weeds. Like, I believe you create a strategic objective, a strategic vision for your company or for anything that you're doing. And you create a culture in it and you pay attention to the things that are important, the dashboard, as everyone says, the parts that are really the numbers that really show what's going on in the company. You create systems and standard operating procedures and a culture of how we do things here. And then you just let people go to do it. Really, and just let them go do it, because people are creative and they're smart and they are passionate. And if you let people do, and you manage the system more than you manage the people, you have this sort of loop where things succeed. You don't have to be in it that much, but you're leading in a way that doesn't seem like you're in it. But yet he was, because every time we spoke, anytime I saw him interviewed, anytime, he just knew what was happening and knew what was going on. And I'm just like, how? And I literally would go to my president, like, did you talk to Colin Powell? And it's just sort of like, but he always paid attention to everything we sent, and there it was. And then I remember one time we were going to go look at the memorial while it was being built, and he came with his entourage, and we were showing up there, and we literally were driving behind him, and my president was there, and like we were like a minute late, and he's like, our president's name was Harry Johnson, like, Harry, you're late. I remember that moment. It's like a minute late. He's such a military guy. So he was definitely someone who I respected as a person and his values, but I also respected him as a leader, and I was able to see it play out in real life. So those are two people who I respect, Dr. Martin Luther King and Colin Powell.
Two excellent picks, I have to say. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a reason why, well, both of them to some extent, but certainly Dr. King more so. They're one of the people that everyone in the world probably knows who they were. And yeah, General Powell, very familiar with him. And in fact, to the point that I used one of his quotes in one of my leadership courses. So there you go.
Really?
Yeah.
Which one was it?
It was Leadership is Solving Problems. That one. And he would say, the day that soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you stop leading them. So it's a very powerful quote. And yeah, really, really switched on guy. Definitely. No question there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been lovely chatting with you. I think.
Same here.
Yeah, good. I'm pleased. The only thing left really is if you want to point the listeners towards a website or a book or your own podcast or all of the above, if they'd like to learn more and maybe work with you.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like if people have resonated with any of the things that we've said and they feel like, maybe one of the 4 things that we talked about being like the reasons why businesses fail, if any of those things are showing up in the business, I do have an ebook called, The 8 True Culprits Causing Chaos in Your Business. And if you feel like that's going to be helpful for you, then I'd like to offer it to your audience. The website is www.nobusinesschaos.com. And they can just download it for free, and hopefully they'll find some insight. There's lots of information around identifying the true reasons for chaos and also how to fix those true reasons. Because I do think that sometimes we think that this is the problem, but it really isn't. It's another thing, and then we need to address that. So I'd love to, and of course, I'm on LinkedIn, and if anyone wants to find me there, I'd love to say hello. It's Carrie Ann Powell. I don't know what the LinkedIn, URL thing is, but find me and say hello, because I'm always really interested in seeing how people are leading in their lives and, connecting in that way.
Awesome. I will put links to all of those things in the episode description as well, so listeners can find it easily.
Awesome.
Lovely. Well, as I say, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And
thank you, David.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You did the same. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Carrie-Anne. Thank you again, Carrie-Anne. What a lovely chat. And listeners, if you would like to learn more about what Carrie-Anne does and perhaps work with her or get some help with your business strategy, the links are in the episode description. So do click on those and get in touch with her. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. If you want to know more about leadership, if you need help, if you're a new manager and you're struggling with issues like confidence or quiet quitting, or just getting the best from your team, please do get in touch. The website is again in the episode description, but it's www.leadernotaboss.co.uk/sign up. And I do have a brand new leadership program that has launched this month. So if you're one of the first 10 people to sign up, you will get it for half price. So do get in touch today. I'd love to help you out with it. Well, I hope you found that episode useful. If you have, please feel free to leave a review wherever it is that you are listening to me right now. And that would be much appreciated. And I hope you'll be joining us next time for next week's episode. And in the meantime, remember, be a leader, not a boss.